This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about the secret history of Satoshi Dice. Now, Satoshi Dice was a Bitcoin betting game that launched in 2012 and clogged the Bitcoin network for years and years with lots of spam transactions. And at one point, Satoshi Dice accounted for over 50% of all Bitcoin transactions. As Eric Voorhees, the founder, says here, just discovered that my Bitcoin casino game, Satoshi Dice, is now responsible for over 50% of all Bitcoin transactions ever, over 1.37 million transactions. And surprisingly, the Federal Reserve wrote a paper and included information about Satoshi Dice. This is from a Fed paper called Bitcoin Technical Background and Data Analysis. And on page 19, they write, as figure 13 shows, within weeks of its inception, Satoshi Dice accounted for more than half of all transactions by volume over the network. This is what the home page or one of the pages of Satoshi Dice look like. We're looking at the Wayback Machine here. And there's sort of a tongue-in-cheek description. Satoshi Dice is a subroutine of an advanced artificial intelligence which arose spontaneously as one of the less harmful consequences of the United States quantitative easing monetary program. The system exists solely within the RAM of an abandoned Nokia 3310 mobile phone, which was left in a subway station in Tokyo and powers itself by feeding off the ghost of the late Satoshi Nakamoto, who was in fact a super hot 20-year-old female Japanese programmer and exotic animal collector. So a lot of sort of tongue-in-cheek humor there. This is what the gambling page looked like. It says at the top, Satoshi Dice is a Bitcoin betting game. Win up to 65,000 times your bet instantly. All rolls are verifiable using the blockchain. So in order to play, you basically send Bitcoin to one of the addresses below, and then they will let you know if you win. And what they do is they do a hash of a secret number, and so you can actually verify that you are playing what a fair game is. The pros and cons. Pros, very clever idea, obviously. And also another pros we said is it's cryptographically provably fair. The game is provably fair. The cons are many. Unfortunately, it's a form of gamified spam, just like inscriptions. Satoshi Dice also spiked transaction fees and competed with real monetary transactions. Just a reminder, the Bitcoin network is for sending and receiving and storing Bitcoin. It's not for on-chain gambling. And you're welcome to gamble with Bitcoin. That's not the problem. But the problem is if people do it on-chain and force node runners to carry all this garbage. So if you're going to gamble with Bitcoin, better to do it off-chain. What were some other problems with Satoshi Dice? Well, the game created lots of uneconomically spendable outputs, small UTXOs, and filled the blockchain with historical records of this gambling that nodes still need to store today. Now, Satoshi Dice, the reason I'm talking about it today is because it was mentioned in a recent interview with Peter Todd, who used it as an opportunity to attack Luke Dashjr in a really underhanded and dishonest way. So I wanted to listen to that.
The idea of spam is not just non-financial. Luke had already put a line in the sand here with Bitcoin Knots, as he was filtering out or censoring, if you want to talk about it that way, financial use cases for Bitcoin.
You mean like Citria layer 2 rollup? Is that what you're referencing
No, I
right
mean
now?
back in the 2013, 2014 era, Luke's Knots was preventing people from using Satoshi Dice.
Oh my gosh. Oh, so he has a very long history of this.
Oh yeah, this goes way back.
At that time, was the community up in arms about this generally, or was most people didn't care?
One way to look at this is you'd ask what percentage of Bitcoin transactions were Satoshi Dice, and at the peak it was like over 50%.
You think that's what pushes people over the edge into thinking something spam is when it's like, okay, this is too much.
So the point I want to make here is there isn't a clear definition here.
Exactly.
And like a lot of this, you couldn't make an argument.
Term.
Yeah.
That's right, Peter. There's not a clear definition between gambling using the blockchain and actually just sending and receiving transactions. So spammers are always trying to muddy the waters between financial transactions and monetary transactions. But unfortunately, Satoshi Dice left a huge imprint on the Bitcoin blockchain, as does the worst Bitcoin miner, worst Bitcoin mining company in America, which is Mara, of course, where I believe Isabel Foxen Duke, who was conducting that interview with Peter Todd, works, as we can see here from her LinkedIn page. I'll put a link to this, the worst Bitcoin miner in America, if you want to learn more about Mara and what they've done to the chain. If you're enjoying this video so far, just pause really briefly here to ask you to help to support the channel. Hit the subscribe button. That does really help. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. So as Adam Back points out here in a post, that Luke, he confirms basically what Peter Todd says in that interview, that Luke Dashjr was trying to filter out Satoshi Dice transactions and was in fact filtering them out at his mining pool, which today is called Ocean, but back then was called Eligius. As Adam writes here, Luke was running Eligius pool at the time, filtering Satoshi Dice transactions. Now, Peter Todd in that clip I just played makes it sound like Luke Dashjr was the only one who thought that Satoshi Dice transactions were spam, and he and Isabel have this pearl clutching moment there. I think that's a pretty misleading representation, since Bitcoin Core devs Matt Corallo and Greg Maxwell both considered Satoshi Dice transactions to be spam at the time. Of course, that was a more innocent, happier era when Greg Maxwell, Matt Corallo, and other Bitcoin Core devs were still able to identify spam and hadn't yet descended into the madness of linguistic nihilism, and no one knows what spam is, as Peter Todd is claiming at the end of that video, that clip I just played. But if we look at Matt Corallo right here, back in June 13th, 2012, he has a post at the Bitcoin Talk Forum that is entitled, and actually got a lot of traction, it's entitled, Huge Increase in Satoshi Dice Spam Over the Past Days. So Matt Corallo at least knew what spam was back in 2012. He writes, over the past 24 hours, the number of Satoshi Dice transactions has increased hugely, leading to transaction memory pools, in other words, mempools, currently at around 9,000 transactions. Satoshi Dice spam, and notice he says spam, Satoshi Dice spam is already a huge percentage of current transactions, but now it's just ridiculous. It's time to start deprioritizing transactions which use very common addresses. And then Free Money here in response uses the argument we often hear today, but Satoshi Dice pays a fee on all transactions. In other words, they pay a transaction fee, so they should be able to spam the chain. And then Matt Corallo responds, paying a meaningful fee to miners, a transaction fee to Bitcoin miners, has no effect on the thousands and thousands of Bitcoin users who have to store the transactions on their disk basically forever. And this is the argument that Mechanic and Luke Dashjr are making today. So if we go back and look in history, this is not a bizarre argument to be making, as Peter Todd would have you believe. And Greg Maxwell even wrote a patch for Bitcoin nodes that would filter out Satoshi Dice transactions as spam. That was back when Greg didn't yet consider running your own mempool policy to be an example of distributed authoritarianism. Here's Raoul Duke writing, do you think Satoshi Dice is blockchain spam? Drop their transaction solution inside. And then he writes, as per my request, Greg Maxwell wrote a patch to apply to the Bitcoin client, in other words, to Bitcoin Core nodes, that will drop all transactions to Satoshi Dice and simply not relay or verify them. Can you imagine Greg Maxwell was censoring transactions like this? This is just terrible. It will also drop all transactions that are less than 10,000 Satoshis in value, so you might want to change that value to 1 or 2 Satoshis. Let's show them how the free market works and that not only miners have a say on this subject. This was from Raoul Duke, who in my mind is a legend based on what he posted here. Vernon715 responds, and why would we want to do that? Why would we want to filter out Satoshi Dice transactions? And then Wacht Ward agrees. Raoul Duke responds, I don't know. Why would you want to filter out these kind of transactions? Maybe you want to save 80% of the bandwidth your Bitcoin client spends and 80% of the CPU cycles used to verify transactions. I know I do. I don't care about gambling, and I don't want to carry out their transactions. It's enough being forced to carry them on my hard drive disk when they get included in a block. Free market, baby. Satoshi Dice is free to spam the blockchain. I'm free to block them from my computer and network and not help them in any way that I see fit. So Raoul Duke was definitely the original filterer. By the way, this isn't a war against Satoshi Dice, he goes on to write. It's only a matter of having the option. If you guys don't like me and everyone else having the option to block transactions we consider spam or prejudicial, who's trying to censor who, after all? And this would be a passage that the current Bitcoin Core devs, and especially the Bitcoin Core maintainers, would do well to look at if they had any understanding of Bitcoin history. This is also a good example of why you should probably apply a 99% discount to everything that comes out of Peter Todd's mouth. I believe he is a complete liar. He's advocated for proposals like removing Bitcoin's 21 million coin cap, as well as for something called demurrage, which would force Bitcoin hodlers to pay a special ongoing property tax to miners. Just one terrible idea after another. Peter Todd's also the creator of Libra Relay, which sends spam directly to Bitcoin miners. He's repeatedly said that he doesn't own any Bitcoin, which is probably why he has no qualms trying to attack it. And as he writes on May 31st, 2025, in this post on X, Peter Todd writes, the Bitcoin blockchain is just a chain of blocks like any other blockchain. It's nothing special. And I'll put a link to this. Here's a talk he gave at a Monero conference about how Bitcoin should change itself to be more like Monero and add a tail emission or add demurrage. The other question to ask here really is what happened to Matt Corallo and Greg Maxwell? Why in 2025 are they suddenly unable to define spam when they were able to back in 2012, 2013? And why in 2025 are they unwilling to make an effort to stop it, in spite of the fact that Greg Maxwell used to write patches and filters to try to stop spam? And why do so many Bitcoin Core supporters treat everything that Greg Maxwell says about spam in 2025 as gospel? I think it would be fun to have a debate. We could probably do this with AI. It'd be fun to have a debate between 2013 Greg Maxwell, who is a sane human being, and Crazy Man 2025, Greg Maxwell, who's definitely gone off the deep end. Whatever happened to verify, don't trust, just too many people supporting every word from Greg Maxwell's mouth without questioning it. And then, of course, there's Eric Voorhees, who, after spamming the blockchain for many years with Satoshi Dice, sold it for 126,315 Bitcoin, which at the time was approximately 12.4 million. I'll put a link to this Bitcoin Magazine article from 2013, written by Eric Voorhees himself, where he explains the transaction and how he received 126,315 Bitcoin, which is obviously worth quite a bit of money today if he kept it. And now, unfortunately, Eric Voorhees is ironically an investor in Citria, along with Jameson Lopp, another spammer. And Citria, of course, is the Bitcoin Core, is the company that Bitcoin Core decided to accommodate by blowing open op return back in May or June. Here's the Series A from Citria, and we can see that they're angel investments from Eric Voorhees as well as Jameson Lopp, so all the bad actors in Bitcoin. And Orkun, who's the co-founder of Citria, writes here, the first BAP, the first Bitcoin app, which is one of their scammy things. The first BAP was Satoshi Dice, built by Eric Voorhees, and yes, he's an angel in Citria. Grateful for that support. Let that sink in. And here's Luke responding, Satoshi Dice was an attack on Bitcoin, nothing more. Let that sink in. So the one thing we can say about Luke Dashjr, unlike people like Matt Corallo and Greg Maxwell, is Luke has been principled, and he's had the same stance since 2012 or 2013. He hasn't changed it for some bizarre reason like people like Matt Corallo and Greg Maxwell. Now, whatever happened to Satoshi Dice, it's now, as you would expect, run by shitcoiners, and it only accepts Bcash, not Bitcoin. So here's the history. We drove Vitalik away from Bitcoin with our community's hostility to spam. We drove Satoshi Dice away from Bitcoin with our hostility to spam. And now it's time to do the same thing with inscriptions and large op returns. I'll put a link here to Satoshi Dice. I don't recommend using this. I'm not even sure if it works, or it'll just take your money. But this is Satoshi Dice today, and we can see here it says win massive amounts of Bitcoin Cash, which is actually just called Bcash. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.